Hey everyone, this week we are doing Solo, a Star Wars story, and in honour of that, as I'm sure Jared explained, we are doing our episodes solo. Solo, we're doing them solo. This week is solo. This one is mine. Okay, Gav. I really like the film. A lot of people don't seem to be enjoying it as much as I did. I really, really did enjoy it, and I'm going to talk about what I enjoyed about it. I'm going to try and run through this chronologically, and I'm sure I will veer off into my traditional tangents at different points. From the very start, I liked that you could see, as soon as you're on Corellia, you could see them building shipyards in space, which was really cool. We've never seen that before. You always wonder where these things come from. I thought that was kind of badass to see. The title said Solo, a Star Wars story, which I had to go back to Rogue One to check whether they did that, and they didn't. So it was interesting to see that these are now sort of branded as a Star Wars story on screen, or whether they continue that. When we're introduced to our two leads, we don't know how old they are. I thought they were probably younger than they appear to be as the film goes on. I wondered if they were teenagers at the start. Game of Thrones lady had her little bob cut, which is like a little, made me think of sort of teenagers in the 50s. And I thought that was cool when they were doing their little sort of running around kind of stuff at the start with all the slave kids in a sort of Oliver Twist kind of scenario. I like the thermal detonator trick Han pulled with his little, it's a thermal detonator. And the Lady Proxima just kind of goes, no, you didn't, you just clicked with your mouth. And it reminded me of a scene in a film from a while back called Titan AE. I say a while back, I think it's 20 odd years ago now, where two people try and use a similarly poor gambit to try and gain access to something, wearing bed sheets and things like that, and pretend to be slaves and get called out on it while it's happening, which was one of the best moments in that movie for me.
You're lying. He's not a slave and you're not trainers. But he doesn't carry himself like a slave. Look at the way he stands. Probably ex-military. Ukrainian traders always threaten before they ask if they've rich tradition. And your robes are made out of bedspreads.
Just out of curiosity, did we have a plan B?
As that sequence continues, you get to see a planet under Empire rule, which is something I don't think we've ever seen before, and was really kind of interesting to see. You get to see what almost to an extent life is like, and how much the Empire and the troopers and stuff care, and how much they don't, about what's happening on that planet as it's going on. And it made me laugh that the Empire used the Imperial Death March for recruiting, if, albeit in a jaunty version, which I hope is available online. If it is, I might drop it in. The whole chase thing I thought was kind of quite cool. It was, again, it harkened back to that 1950s vibe that the film had, like street racing almost to an extent, boosting cars and stuff. And it reminded me specifically of a bit from Police Academy, I think, when Mahoney comes into it and he's parking cars for a living, and some important guy comes up and they're like, park this car, and Mahoney goes, there's no space, and then he drives it sideways and just dumps it and just yells, the damn thing fits.
It fits! Damn thing fits! I thought there were no more spaces. Am I an idiot or what?
From there, we go to the bit with the Starship Troopers bit 3 years later on the planet, which I thought was kind of cool. It was nice to get a sense of what was happening around the galaxy, I suppose, at that point. And to see a sort of botched ground invasion thing was kind of interesting to me. And it was a little bit kind of like, this is how this looks. And, you get to see how Corellia looks and the shipyards. And then you get to see what life is like for the sort of underclasses of Corellia. And then you jump to a war. And then, so there was a lot of jumping around in the universe that I really enjoyed. And the obvious through line of both Starship Troopers and that one episode of Futurama that I can't remember the name of, where they're the invading force. The Han literally says it, it's their planet, we're the hostiles. And he's cursed out for it by his leader, which I dug. I dug all that sort of stuff. The whole, the idealistic, cocky, young, arrogant Han in this is, I feel like it's quite fresh. I quite enjoyed the take on it. And although this film isn't the entire journey, I think the journey to becoming the Han we know and love is going to be interesting. You get the introduction of Chewbacca at that point, and as Jon Favreau calls him, a Wookiee, who constantly says Wookiee, which made me laugh.
Whoa, is that a Wookiee?
And just Jon Favreau in general as Rio was great. The whole journey at this point in the film really interested me because I really liked how it put Han in the role of Luke in the original Star Wars, where he becomes the audience surrogate, where you're seeing everything through Han's eyes, and in the way that you saw it through Luke's in the original. And it's kind of interesting to take a side character, a character a lot of people view as a hero, and then place him right as the audience surrogate. So you kind of get to experience things through him and stuff, rather than him being like this kind of cipher towards the side, which I thought worked really well in this. And I think actually will hopefully sort of bring a newer audience to it. The whole thing actually played as a young adult version of Star Wars to me. Like it fit quite well against like Hunger Games or something like that, and that's something I think is going to bring in new fans. Like it'll encourage this kind of new people to Star Wars, and I really like that about it. I thought it was kind of really cool to it both felt fresh, but it also felt very balanced in the lore. And I know some people are having problems with that, but the fact that it did manage to for me at least balance those two things and add new stuff and wrap a nice story around it and give us some things we've never seen in Star Wars worked really well for me. The kind of music is kind of like a greatest hits record introduction to Star Wars, I think, which is, I think the whole thing feels like it could be a lot of people's first Star Wars, which I like. From there we go to the train heist, which I thought was a great sequence, and I think at this point it was really beginning to dawn on me how good the film looked, how real the film looked, how everything you saw on Corellia, whether it was digital or physical, really did had weight to it. It felt real, and it's a lot of it is on Bradford Young, the cinematographer, who has had at least 3 appearances in my top 10 of the year listings till now. I do these silly top 10s of the year with some friends of mine, and he's had 3 films in those in the last couple of years. So for him to be shooting a Star Wars now is really exciting to me, and I hadn't occurred to me until until I clocked that the film was looking so good, that I was like, oh yeah, who shot this? And he did. And before that, he shot Arrival, he shot Selma, he shot A Most Violent Year, all of which appeared in my top 10s in the last 3 to 5 years. He's also in if you're interested in cinematography, he was also a talking head in a great documentary called Side by Side, which is about film versus digital in cinematography. And as far as I'm aware, and certainly by the look of this film, the very sort of naturally lit, the illusion of natural lighting on set and the very low lighting levels and stuff, and how sort of not grey, but how kind of it has this kind of sheen to it, and there's a lot of shadow, there's a lot of high contrast stuff. It had this feel of digital photography at its best for me. Not necessarily colourless, I suppose. Some people might say it's kind of colourless, but it certainly had a unique look to it that I don't think would have been replicated in one of the major episodes on film. And I love that we're in an era with Star Wars now where the films can feel kind of consistent in terms of the world they're in, but also experimental in things like what Rian Johnson did with The Last Jedi and how that looked, and then this one looking kind of so different but still feeling like it's in this lived-in world and is consistent to the Star Wars that will come in the original trilogy. I think this one looks amazing, and I think it's really cool. From there we go to human mood ring Paul Bettany on his amazing space yacht, and I've loved him since Killernet in the 90s, which was a dreadful mini-series that I have very fond memories for and probably shouldn't ever rewatch. But he's back on form, playing like a twitchy psychopath after playing like Vision for the Marvel movies and stuff like that, and having this nobility to him. He's back in that kind of like, he's he could switch any minute from about to be your best friend to about to murder you, and I it's nice to see him back in that form. I also kind of dug his weird angry light up face and bloodshot eyes, and the fact that his head appeared to be held together by, like, there was a seam running up the one side of his head and it seemed to be held together with like a bit of tape or something like that, which I kind of dug. Also in that scene, there are two deliveries of the word "all right," banged up right against each other. He turns to Kira at one point, and after he's told her he's going to go with it, and he goes, "You're going to go with him," and he goes, "All right," and it's like, "I will murder you if you don't." And then he turns back to everyone else in the room and just goes, "All right," and it's kind of like, "I'm your best friend again," and that just typifies this performance. He's right on the knife's edge all the time, and I really dug that. In terms of him coming in as in the reshoots with Ron Howard's end of the film, the whole film to me felt very, very consistent. It felt like a film that was authored by one person. It felt very uniform, I suppose would be the term for it, and not like a mess. I can usually feel the seams in these things, for better or for worse. Like Rogue One had it, and Justice League definitely had it, and the Fantastic Four, the Josh Trank Fantastic Four, the more recent one, definitely had it, where you could feel, everything changed because someone else was directing or because there was a reshoot. And this film didn't have that at all, and so I never, until the end, I wasn't really questioning it. And I had to think back and, okay, so what if it's 70-30 like the internet said, that 70% was Ron Howard's and 30% was Chris Lord and Phil Miller, or is it the other way around, Phil Miller and Chris Lord? No, yeah. What was theirs and what was whose, and you couldn't really feel it because it did feel such a consistent presentation. And there were two moments for me that felt like they were probably Lord Miller's, which was during the Sabak game. There's a moment where Han is having a go at the guy with the 6 eyes next to him because one of his eyes is on his cards, and he turns to him and goes, "No, keep your eyes on your cards." And the guy's turning, and I think it's probably an improv based on the fact that the guy who was performing the thing turns a little bit, and his cards turn to him, and he goes, "Well, now I can see your cards." And that felt like an improv. That felt like that some of that scene at least probably came from the Lord Miller one. And later on, there's a bit with Woody Harrelson where when the one cannon gets ripped off and it cuts back to him and he's like, I really hurt my thumbs. And I felt like that was probably a Lord Miller bit as well. Those were the only two bits. And that was in terms of like thinking back through it. That wasn't, okay, so, what scenes were what and how did they feel? Like it, to me, it felt very consistent, which I really liked. We also obviously in that before them we have Kira and Han reunited for the first time, and I although it's kind of very surface level, plays into my theory of it being like a young adult film, which don't take that as a negative. Like there's a big audience for those films and they really have their place, and I respond to a lot of them, and I really do like this one, so it's not a negative to me to call it that. It's actually quite high praise, and I think if Star Wars can do everything like that, it can do big blockbusters, it can do young adult films like this, and it can play to everyone. I think you've got something really fantastic, which is what I would think everyone wants Star Wars to develop into if there are going to be more of them. And in that respect, the romance between Kira and Han, I really bought into. I bought into the kind of doomed, young romance of it, and the idea that they both know, or at least Kira knows, that it'll never work, it'll never happen. They've grown too far apart in the 3 years they've been away from each other. I think there's so many little moments in the performance there that really support that, and the way, it's a lot of times it's on her face, and he's deeply still in love with her, and all he's done for 3 years is think about that. And she's, she says it. She says, "You don't know what I've done. I never left." She's been through a lot, and how she got off that planet might tie into what she says when they're split apart. In the spaceport, she says something about being trafficked or being sold, and maybe it all ties into that. You really don't know what she's been through, and I think the idea that this sort of passionate young love affair could work out is something that they both want, but hasn't dawned on them really. I mean, maybe a little bit to her, but at the best moment she thinks it can work. The idea that they will be together when the chances are they won't be, and obviously we know they won't be. He'll end up with Leia, but the idea that their paths will cross quite a lot in these 10 odd years before we were first introduced to Han is something that I think there's a lot of truth in it, and I think it's really interesting to see play out like this. And I don't know, I really responded to it. So that passion of youth thing they've got there is great. What else have we got? Lando's good, and is getting a lot of praise, and rightfully so. I love his little Billy D. Williams style voice accent affectation at times, and then sometimes it cracks, and when he's stressed it isn't there, and then a lot of times he's putting it on, which I really liked. which I think actually plays into a greater sort of underlying theme in the film, if you're looking for them, where everyone, I think, is almost playing a part. Han is playing cockier than he is playing more experienced than he is. Lando is sort of playing slightly more reserved, I think, maybe than he is in when he has the accent. It's this character he's playing, and then sometimes it cracks and he becomes this other thing, which later obviously later they'll both be more comfortable with. And I think Kira is obviously, she's playing a part. I think it's interesting if you look at it as a film about like not knowing yourself yet, that it's interesting almost that actually it's called Solo and not Han, because Solo is the identity he's given, not who he is. And so you've kind of got a sort of this youthful kind of finding yourself thing going on in there, which I really liked. I really responded to, and I think Lando's performance is probably the best or easiest version of that. But for me, like L3 totally steals the show from him. I'm sure a lot of people are saying Lando's great, and I know there's already calls for a Lando film, but L3 stole this film for me. I'll go and see the Lando film, but L3 stole this one. I really adored L3. I don't know the rest. L337, I think. And she kicks off the whole the Kessel on Kessel. She kicks off the whole robot revolution or droid revolution. And I don't know why, but I was howling throughout that entire sequence. The idea of like the one little robot that's just stamping on the desk, and the one that is just slapping like a tray against some buttons, and then the one that just kind of goes freedom and pushes a button, and her chatting to Lando back on the ship, and like, you'll never believe what I'm seeing, is like, is it a full-blown revolution? Like, I just really bought into all that stuff. I just really adored it. And later on she has the line of like when they're on the Falcon, and Lando goes, "Can I get you anything?" And she's like, "Equal rights." And I just loved all the bitey, the bickering between those two. I thought was absolutely adorable. And I thought it played so, it sort of felt like the relationship had so much more history to it than we see. And it was, even though a lot of things in this film are played very broad, I just really adored the interplay between those two. And I love during the rebellion sequence where you get the other Wookiees introduced, and Han introduces himself to the other Wookiee that Chewie is helping, and he just says, "Oh, I'm Han's friend," and no, I'm Chewie's friend, and the other guy, the other Wookiee, reaches across and ruffles Han's hair. Like, I thought it was great like perspective gag, because to the Wookiee, Han is just his pet or his sidekick, or any jokes anyone's ever made about Chewie being a Wookiee, and I thought that was a great little inversion of that, because from a Wookiee's point of view, that the human's the pet, the human is the sidekick. It just made me laugh. I just loved the little ruffling of the hair as they went along. As we're getting away from Kessel, the visuals. I mean, in the Maelstrom, with the Star Destroyer, and the TIE fighters, and them entering the Maelstrom to escape, that was all great. Loved it. The fact that and it made me laugh when they jettison the escape pod. They call the front of the Millennium Falcon where the gap is, they call it a mandible notch. I don't know why, but I don't know, mandible notch made me laugh. I know the backstory stuff has been accused of being pandering and stuff to some people, and I'm just going to talk about what I like here. I usually don't like backstory. Too much backstory usually bothers me. I've said on this show before, like, my whole backstory is bullshit thing. But I think here, most of that stuff was really just pushed to the edges, for me at least. So there's the little things like, I don't know, the Falcon losing its dish again, him being given the blaster, any of that sort of stuff. It all played for me. I think if you're focusing on that stuff, you're missing what the film's doing so well around it. I mean, a lot of it was just like, oh, I get that, or oh, that was that. It wasn't. I didn't feel the film was stopping to give you a reference like that and I wasn't wildly nostalgic about the film. I was enjoying it as a new piece. Yes, it's going backwards from what we've already had, but it never it never felt like it was clunky and stuff. In maybe in some other way that Rogue One or Force Awakens had little bits of that. I didn't feel that here. I responded to it. I really liked it. I feel like this and The Last Jedi sit quite nicely in my not new enjoyment, but my continued enjoyment of Star Wars. After Kessel, we go to I forget the name of the planet, but where they refine at the non-Empire refinery, and I enjoyed all of that too. That all felt very practical. I don't know where they shot it, but there's, other than the ships in the background, there wasn't a lot of CG there, and I liked all the look of it. And the whole ending was a fun kind of trifle of a thing with the double cross and everything, and you have that beginning of the rebellion on top of it, so you a little added weight and a little kind of foreshadowing for later, or you don't even know how this thing's going to expand. But the idea that the Rebel Alliance just starts from a group of people like that was kind of great in a way. Like it showed where this thing builds from. And I enjoyed all of this as it propels towards this kind of ending, and you don't know where this thing's going to stop exactly, or what the ending's going to be, because in theory, if your story structure, some of the things that were buried later, at some point someone was going to turn on someone, whether it was going to be her or whether it was going to be Tobias. Something was going to kick off here, and it did, and it played out. And you had nice little scenes between, before you had the final fight, you had a nice little scene between Kira and Han, where the idealism and her little bit more worldly experience, galaxy experience, is playing out, and he's like, I'm an outlaw, and she's kind of smiling like, you don't even know, kid. The idea that he's the good guy, and she takes her opportunity to once Dryden Voss is dead, she takes her opportunity to lead the criminal syndicate, and the Darth Maul cameo, which was what it was. And I wouldn't call that part of the double cross. I would say that she was taking her opportunity, and I believe that she did love him, but it was never going to work, or it's not, the story isn't done yet, in the same way like when Lando left, you knew that wasn't going to be the end of that story. Like the idea that to some extent these are people in a situation where they have to think of themselves first was something I think the film conveyed very well, and that's what I liked about it. You had going back to where I was, it's this simplistic kind of version of Han that we have here, who is our entryway into this world. So there are going to be points at which the world is going to kick back at him. I think it's beautifully summarized actually in the spin on the classic. I've got a good feeling about this. I've got a good feeling about this, and it's just kind of like, that's the person he is right now. He's not the cynic, the Han we will know and love by the time Star Wars kicks off proper. The encounters he has at this point are, he's a different man or he's a boy, I suppose, young man to who he will become, and that's what I think I really liked about it. It was like a different version of his character. It's a proto version of who he will become, and there was this idealism and arrogance and stuff behind him, but he's gonna go out there and he's gonna do it, like he says in that thing. He's I can look after myself or whatever. If we get more of these, I think we'll see him looking after himself, and every now and again it'll be chipped away, and it might be the relationship with Kira and how that changes that will do it. And I could happily have two more of these, have a little trilogy of these that come out over 10 years and tell this story that leads us up to A New Hope. And I hope for that reason that the film does find its audience. I know as I'm recording this that the box office numbers for this weekend are starting to come out, and those aren't necessarily as positive as I'm being about it. But I hope that word of mouth helps the film, and I hope like the people that enjoyed it like me, I hope you respond to what I'm saying, and I hope that, if you haven't seen it, maybe you will go and see it now. I hope you enjoy it. I think there's a lot to enjoy in this film, and it's something that I think between like The Last Jedi doing what it's doing, and whatever the episode 9 becomes, and these side stories being like, so the episodes will have to go forwards and the stories can kind of go back. They don't all have to be about people we know and love. They can be about kind of anything. And I think almost in being a very good one about someone we do know quite well, but in a world we don't know, and in an expanding world we don't know, seeing bits of the universe we haven't seen before. This one proves how good these stories can be, and how they can be these these kind of big, what would have been fan films before. If you can pitch a good idea in the same way the idea for Rogue One had, was a fan film idea, I think it proves what the anthology stories, or whatever we're calling them, can be against the main episodes. And they don't all have to be about characters we know and love, but they can be, and they can do new things, and then they can do different things. And I think if we, at its best, I think we can get some really, really good films out of Star Wars at this speed, where we get an episode and a story and an episode and a story. And then you'll get more and new and different things, and the universe will expand, and I think it's good for Star Wars. I've got a good feeling about this.